about 230 acres. And we've done quite a lot in Wiltshire, Oxfordshire, and around here. What I thought I would actually start off with is the future. Has solar and wind had its day? Well, obviously, the subsidies have all been removed, and we are seeing no wind projects being funded onshore, and solars, there's doubt when you're bidding in the auction whether solars will get funding. I actually think the market is going to come back for solar. We are going to see what we call private wiring. And what's going to happen is the developers are going to change their face. There's been a massive rationalisation of the solar owners. When I first started, there were probably 300 gold seekers knocking on our door, saying we're a solar developer, as if they were the first person from Mars to arrive with it, and we'd had a queue of them. We're down to, really on the funding side of things, probably down to less than 20 now who own the solar parks throughout the whole of the UK. And what we're seeing is the Next Energies, the Foresight Group, the Bluefields, the Light Sources are all now gathering large portfolios of solar and wind farms. And they are now quoted on the alternative stock exchange. And a lot of them are, if you talk to their MDs, are looking to move into doing retailing of electricity. Now, the reason they want to retail is solar farms without subsidy need to reach a magic figure of making 7.5p to make the whole, per kilowatt hour, to make the whole thing work. Now, we remember right back in 2011, the subsidy was 34.3p. Today, it's less than, there isn't anything there. Now, if they're selling electricity and they're selling it wholesale, they're selling it for about 3.5p at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And if they were selling it was sunny at the moment, they'd probably be selling it, as people are watching the 6 o'clock news, they'd probably be selling it for about 6.5p wholesale. Retail is probably between, depending on your Honda, at 8-9p. It's up to sort of 15-16p at the peak hours. So what they're actually looking to do is take forward that they will take the ecotricity model and actually start retailing electricity. So that is one future for the renewables, and I think it could be we're going to get renewables without subsidy, because the people owning the plants are selling electricity at retail prices. The second one is private wiring. Now, this is actually one I did, very first solar I did. It's South Marston Solar Farm in Swindon. This is connected to the Honda plant. So there's the solar farm, here's the Honda plant over here. Now, Honda were paying about 9p for electricity. What they did on this particular solar farm, and the reason it ended up getting connected to Honda, it was by fate, was the grid connection here was 2 miles away. Basically what happened was the guillotine for the subsidy came down in August 2012, and we had to get it built before that guillotine fell. So we went and knocked on Honda's door. They were paying 9p for electricity. They agreed to basically buy the electricity for the next 10 years for 7.5p. And that solar farm got built. Now, this is where other solar farms are going to be built. So the back of BMW, you may see a solar farm being connected to large production plants. A car factory, for instance, takes as much energy as a large town. But what we're also going to see, I think, is a rationalisation, a change of the legislation, more like the telecoms legislation, where to put the power in the grid, so you can produce the energy in Devon, and the factory can be in Sheffield, there will be a cost for taking that through the grid, a fixed price, a bit like you pay a fixed price for your telephone line. And I think that means there is a future for solar and wind. It's going to take some time to bed in as these companies move into being retailers, but the days of selling all of the energy to firms that, like Your Energy, I think are numbered. They are going to end up where they are retailing, and those names like Foresight and Bluefields will be the future. I'm struggling again here. I hope it is there. Just use a rubber. Right. So, the second one is batteries. Now, I've been thinking in my office, when is the battery boom going to actually start? We've been talking about it ever since solar subsidies went, biomass, the Irish scandals, etc. Obviously, as Catherine has said, solar at night will not produce any electricity. So if you have a battery, you can basically plug it in and you can charge it during the day and dispel it when we're sitting at home watching the telly between 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night and get a higher electricity price. But the people who've already put solar farms up and are getting subsidy are really, really scared that that subsidy may be prejudiced if they go and stick a battery next door to the solar farm. The other one is the batteries, these that are being built, are actually being connected directly into a plug from the electricity pole. So what's actually happening is the battery is being charged and the person is having to pay a wholesale electricity price, same price as you and I pay for electricity, to charge the battery, and then battery is dispelling when the electricity price is higher. Now, that is why we're not seeing the whole thing develop. Everybody's thinking the Chinese are going to come out with a magic widget that will bring the price of batteries down. And all the research at Culham and Harwell and all throughout the world is to try and find a battery that will last and dispel and will be economical to build. And that is where the slight problem is. I have several sites going forward now on batteries. We've got one that's actually going to start build. There are only 9 battery sites, commercial battery sites, built in the UK. There were 11 given subsidies last year, and there are 28 that have got subsidies for this year. And we've got one starting to build in 2 weeks' time, which is one of my own projects. Now, there are loads of subsidies available. The whole of the market subsidies have moved from the wind to the solar to cross to storage. And that storage can come in many different forms, but these are all the subsidies that are available. And it's very far-fetched how many different subsidies there actually are. But you effectively, to summarise it, you get paid for storing it, you get paid for then supplying it. So you get a grant for basically saying you've got a store that is available with so many seconds availability, and you get a grant for saying you've got 2 hours worth of energy which you can then dispel at a click of a button. And you also get a grant for when you're dispelling it, and you get a higher electricity price when you're dispelling it. And energy can be stored in so many different ways. Of the amount of subsidy that was actually available, there was only 400 megawatts of subsidy available. So if you go around the market and you have someone knocking on your door, getting very excited that they're going to install batteries, and you think, wow, this is my big diversification for making an income, don't get too excited. These guys are looking at 400 farms. They will choose one of those 400 farms to take forward. And even then, you need to have grid availability, and you need to basically be in the cheapest place. You are in direct competition with your next door neighbour if you'll buy a substation. You will get, that same developer will go knocking on the door to all three of you round a substation, and he will go to the one who does the cheapest deal. Now, that is effectively what is happening in reality. So, a battery, it costs currently about £1 million. It looks like this, and it is effectively takes up about half an acre. The easiest example of this is it's actually a form of renting out a building, but the rents are very equivalent to renting out a building, but what you've got is you're getting a site which you probably wouldn't have got planning permission to get an income out of. So they can take a field, buy a substation where your farmyard wasn't, and actually create an income flow for you. I've gone the wrong way there. So as I said, there were 28 that got subsidy this last year, and there are a number of different ways you can get the subsidy for it. It doesn't just need to be a battery, it can be a flywheel, it can be pumping water up and down a hill. The key is a grid connection. If you're miles away from a substation, you will not get an income from a battery. You literally need to have a substation on your farm. If you've got a substation on your farm, and this is what a substation looks like, it could be from this up to about 1/4 acre. Ideally, it needs to be a 33 kilowatt substation. If you've got big A-framed pylons, those could be 132 or 400 kilowatt substations. Those are extremely expensive to connect into. And we're looking at connecting into a substation, be anything from £250,000, the highest I've ever seen is £7 million. And for every metre you're away from that substation, it's £90 a metre to put the cable into the substation. So if you're more than 1,000 metres away, it's going to virtually cripple the project. So everywhere they are looking are right by substations. The second one is the number of substations that have capacity. There are very, very few substations that have spare capacity left. And we've had a few doorstop sitters from developers who literally will sit round a farmer trying to persuade them to do a deal. Just be very wary, because the rents are ranging between £1,000 to £4,000 a megawatt. There are some firms that are step sitters. They're quite often put in cargo crates, 30 feet by 15 feet, and they are painted the right colour to blend in. They then have a security fence around the outside, which can be 2 metres high, and that area that they are renting is about 1/4 acre to half an acre. What they've got to do is, because this site is by a substation, you've got to get how is the electricity going to get to where they put the battery site, back to the substation, in both directions. So you need to think of where the easement route is for that electricity. And that might then sever your land drones or sever a track. So you need to think, when you're entering to the lease, where those cables are going. Similarly, they've got to get a track down to where they're building the plants. So you need to think about, is that track influencing another diversification project or a development project? So all of these need to be considered. these battery barns do make a noise. They have air conditioning to keep them cool. So you need to think, when you're placing them, there is a hum, like a bee, that will come out of these areas. They will also, you've got to think, where will you get planning permission? And I quite like tucking them as much as possible behind trees, or we make the developer basically put trees in. So we do a lease that's maybe an acre, they have their quarter of an acre site, and then we tell them they've got to plant trees around the rest of it. So, the rental levels are going up. The very, very early ones we did, we were struggling to really get more than £3,000 an acre. We're now getting £4,000 an acre on the odd, really good site. We're looking at incomes. Now, I think we actually made a mistake when we did the solar leases. We didn't realise how much the project rights were actually worth. There were solar developers who needed land and they needed a grid connection. And there were these developers who basically paid probably £50,000 to get a planning permission, and then they effectively paid a deposit to get a grid connection. And then what they did was sell the piece of paper. And at the beginning of solar, we never realised that piece of paper might be selling for £200,000 a megawatt, but it was by the end of the solar bubble. And effectively, what we never realised is that that particular market was getting towards being the values of maybe residential development land. So on looking on the very first planning permissions we've seen put in, we've actually realised that it's not a complicated thing to actually apply for planning permission for a solar barn. It's actually very similar. Every planning application is the same. It's the same building, just in a different orientation, on a plan, in a different place, with a photo montage of what it looks like. So what I have been doing recently is making inquiries, and the planning permission is probably something that would cost less than £3,000 or £2,000 normally to apply for planning permission for. So there we are, all going, let's follow the same model as we did with solar. But I'm just starting to wonder whether actually the model is the farmer gets the grid connection, and the farmer gets the planning permission, and then the farmer goes to those accountants who sold those projects, and we sell the project, and we get the piece of paper worth that sum of money for just passing a piece of paper, and then we go back to a lease, like Catherine described, to get a regular income. So you take a capital check and a regular income check. Now, on my research, the problem with that is the planning permission is relatively cheap, but the grid connection is horrendously expensive. In order to actually apply for the grid connection, is about £900. If you went to a DNOC or one of the companies that basically apply for grid connections, it's about £900 to fill the paperwork in. But what is the expensive bit is 28 days after you've been given that offer, if there's somebody else competing for that substation's capacity, you will have to pay anything from £10,000 to £250,000 to hold that grid. And if you don't pay it in that window of 28 days, you effectively will lose it to somebody else who's applying for that particular substation. So the good news is if you were to go down that route of trying to get it and pay your own grid, you do get that money back, but you get it back less the cost of the design that basic SSE or Western Power have done to it. So if you were to go down the route of trying to get the planning yourself and the grid yourself, it would cost £3,000 to get the planning permission, £900 for the grid connection, and then anything between 10 and a quarter of a million to get the electricity connection. That 10 to quarter of a million, if you then didn't take the project through or didn't get planning permission, you can get your money back, but they would keep about 20 to 30,000 pounds of that money, SSE, for the cost of what they had to do in their design. So there is a market there for those of you who are wanting to take a risk to actually push the project on yourself and then sell that piece of paper. But many farmers can't afford to do that and don't want to take that sort of hefty type risk. So, we move on to those of you who've done solar roofs. Now, electricity independence away from the grid is now easily possible. Many of you put in your own solar roofs, and Tesla are now approaching farmers about trying to sell them batteries so that you can change the hours when you dispel the electricity you are using. Now, when I look at the window of renewable energy, there is a situation where if you pay out about 10 years electricity supply up front, you could have a position that in 10 years' time, your electricity doesn't cost anything to produce. Now, farmers, that is very few of you, will move in a 10-year period. The average householder or the average business, probably in 10 years, might move their location of their business. So the actual value of doing that is taken away. But there's one catch. A battery pack like that is about £59,000 for 210 kilowatts. A 14K one is about £5,400. But Tesla themselves say that will only last 7 years. So don't just hold a bit at the moment before installing battery, because we don't know whether you might have to then pay that £59,000 again in 7 years' time. What we can't find out is it 7 years of dispelling storage, or is it 7 years lifetime and then the lithium's got to be changed? Just think of a Duracell battery. The Duracell battery runs out of power after so long. A rechargeable battery, after so long, also runs out of power. And that's what the big questions that are being asked by the whole industry on battery storage. A Tesla car, we're told you'll have to buy a new battery after 5 years if you have a Tesla car. So what I quite like to do on this is actually see people who put them in, and in time see how long the batteries have got to dispel. But this is going to be, the future will get here, but it's probably not coming quite as quickly as we thought it was going to. So, the other thing in renewables that is becoming bigger and bigger is gas-to-grid biodigesters. Typically, the biodigester market was that they found a farmer who had no borrowing and persuaded him to buy a decline. Probable cost £1 million. And the chap could afford to build it without any borrowing. And what typically happened was not all the bits were in the box when you got it on the farm, because you thought, actually, I've bought my bit, and then you found half the bolts weren't there, and they go, oh, that's another £250,000. And that's what typically has happened on the AD projects that have been built. There's been an overrun, and the other one is not enough research by the farmers often happened, and the whole project takes longer to roll out. So what we've seen is farms that were, AD plants that were supposed to be going on tap in 6 months' time take a year to build. And they don't produce energy, and the money runs out, and then they take a mortgage. And the other thing that's happening on the AD plants is the salesman, once you've got it up and running about a year, comes knocking back on the door, goes, do you want it any bigger? And it gets bigger. So it's become like a big cash cow, rather you have one cow instead of 300 cows. So what we're starting to see is the AD plants that are doing food from farm product are struggling, but the AD plants that are doing waste energy are thriving. And the companies that are having a number of them built are actually reciprocating their idea on farm after farm after farm, because they've learned the mistakes. Whereas the farmer who tries to do it makes the mistakes, and they make the same mistake each time, and it seems to happen on every one we've seen. So what we're starting to see is a market where people will now come to the farm, and they will offer to build an AD plant on your farm. And the AD plant is typically on a 3 to 5 acre site. It's about 3 megawatts in size, and they effectively build it and they pay you a rent for where they built it. And we've been getting rents of about £20,000 an acre for where these AD plants are. And what we're doing is making that as a standalone rental agreement on that site. We're then entering into another legal agreement to actually provide food for it. So a completely separate deal that you've actually got your 500 acre farm, you've got an AD that's going to bring in £100,000, RPI index for 20 years, and you then say, I will supply 300 tonnes worth of food for that, 300 acres worth of food for that AD plant. And what we're then seeing is quite often they'll come and say, can we have all your friends' telephone numbers? And what that farmer's then doing is actually bringing in, say, 2,000 acres worth of food to that AD plant and getting an income from doing that, maybe getting enough acreage to even buy machinery. And this is a model that Ecotricity was the first one I saw do, but we're seeing it coming through on it, and we're then seeing other contracts coming out of it, such as taking the waste digestate. And some of the neighbours who have got old dairy farms with silage clamps are getting incomes for storing silage on their farm because they can't get planning permission for a 30,000 tonne silage clamp, so they're taking satellite silage clamps to do it. Now this way, I think you de-risk the project. You get an income, a diversification income for your third crop being grown on the farm, your break crop, but you take out the risk. And this is a model that we're seeing happening, but because the subsidy system has changed, about 50% of these plants are now taking what's called a food soup. So instead of it coming 100% from maize, there is a food soup which is made up of vegetables, etc., made on an off-site factory. It comes in a tanker and it's mixed with the AD, mixed with the maize and the rye and all of that. So that is the model that we're starting to see on AD. And I actually think it's actually a very good model because the guys who are doing it made the mistakes on other plants. And it's very de-risked. What you need is a gas pipeline in your local vicinity. And the screen there shows the sort of incomes that we have been able to achieve on these side of things. You need, ideally, an ex-dairy farm is absolutely brilliant, and effectively you don't have to do any of those. You don't have to provide the fodder, you don't have to operate it, and you don't have to provide the labour. But if they pay enough, you do it. And that is a method. There are a number of these running through in central England, coming through, and we're seeing some good operators in this marketplace. So that is effectively my sort of gallop through What I've missed there is biomass. I think the days of biomass are numbered. There are the vast majority of the biomass plants that are being built, the actual biomass that's being used in them is coming from offshore. It's coming in from boats from Canada, Sweden, Mozambique. And it's something that suits very large houses or institutions where there is a lot of energy that's there. But the Irish situation could see that element of the market numbered, the number of days of that element of the market numbered. Wind, I think it's very offshore. If you go to Scotland, it's going to come, but the wind follows the same as the solar. We could see private wiring on solar. But that's really a sort of gallop through of where the renewables are. And the big guess is what's the next widget that will come after all of these. But the ones that are really, really kicking at the moment are biodigesters, and the battery is emerging, but I think solar is on the way back. Thank you.